For this 300th episode of Hermitix, I am joined once again by Bob Dobbs to discuss James Joyce's Finnegans Wake in relation to the work of Marshall McLuhan, alongside discussion on technology, media, and the work of Wyndham Lewis. I would like to say a very big thank you to all paying patrons and subscribers and supporters and listeners and followers at this juncture for episode 300. If you wish to support the podcast and keep everything running, as usual, please find the links for the Patreon in the description below. Otherwise, please enjoy. So, Bob Dobbs, thanks once again for joining me on Hermitix podcast.
Great to be here, James.
Yeah.
I think it is. It's not negative. We haven't gone down. You've been around lurking, so that's cool.
Yeah, it's episode 300, so I couldn't think of anyone greater than yourself. And you've been, a lot of people have asked to have you back. So,
oh, great.
There you go. Good praise. We are going to be talking about, McLuhan, obviously, but largely in relation to James Joyce, and then specifically in relation to James Joyce's infamous, extremely difficult, strange novel, Finnegans Wake. But basically, I want to begin actually with a quote from McLuhan, that because the Joyce stuff for McLuhan is weirdly hidden, but he says at one point, "Nobody could pretend serious interest in my work who is not completely familiar with all of the works of James Joyce and the French symbolists." So I want to begin, Bob, just by asking you, what is Joyce for McLuhan? Like, where does this begin? Why is he so important?
Have you had many talks on Finnegans Wake yet?
No.
Your series?
No.
Oh, this is the first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So McLuhan's PhD came out in 42, 43, done over there in England at Cambridge. The last line says that I will do more work on these themes, because he basically retrieved the trivium and the quadrivium, but emphasized the trivium. That's rhetoric, dialectics, and grammar, the key structure of education for 1,000 years. Started to fade out with the printing press and the mathematicians take over, an effect of the printing press in McLuhan's terms. But he goes back and excavates this history of the trivium and how it influenced everything in culture in the West, more than people, they had forgotten about that by 1940. It was diminished in the early first part of the 20th century incredibly. So it was part of the removal of Latin, at least in North America, from the schools. And that was a blow against the trivium. So he ends the thesis saying there's a lot more. Oh, I should say the thesis about Thomas Nash in the 16th century. Mm-hmm. And he does Nash and wraps that up. And he says, of course, the writer, the creator who implemented a Nash sensibility is James Joyce. So my further additions to the PhD or other writings will be based on focusing on James Joyce. So he states that very early. This is before anybody knows about him, right? Mm-hmm. He's only for 1911. So he's 30 years old, say, 41, 42, 43. And so he, becomes a professor in Madison, Wisconsin in 36, 37 for a year. And that's when he discovered he had no clue how to talk to these American kids, that there's something different about him. And he hadn't been prepared for it. So he started looking into advertising and pop culture. And he went to St. Louis University in 37, and he was there for 7 years. And in that period, in 43, Wyndham Lewis, during the war from England, was in Windsor, Ontario, and in Toronto before that, but his hotel burnt down. So he's down in Windsor teaching, and Catholic University, at Assumption University it was called, now the University of Windsor. And McLuhan's mother, who was very cultured, heard he was there, so told Marshall and his friend Felix they should look into Lewis. He's up there. So they booted up there. And so he met him in the summer of 43. That was an incredible meeting. And he invited Lewis down to St. Louis, where McLuhan was doing the University of St. Louis, I think it was, to give him painting commissions. Mm-hmm. So he did that. So Lewis was down there with McLuhan for a year and a half. 43, 44, and they're going to start a journal called Restart the Enemy, a journal Lewis did in 27, 28, 29, and then stop that. But McLuhan was well versed on Wyndham Lewis's writing, so he said, "Yeah, let's start it up again." So they got ready. Lewis would be up in Windsor, so McLuhan arranged for himself to be transferred from St. Louis to Windsor, Ontario. So he got a teaching job there at that university. But in that process, Lewis went through what many people said. Occasionally, he'd get paranoid with his friends, and his wife wanted to go back to London, and it was getting near the end of the war. So as soon as the war ended, in August 45, they got the first boat to London. Mm-hmm. So Lewis was out of McLuhan's life, and Lewis was stranded, and McLuhan was stranded in this outback called Windsor. But within 2 years, 46, he got to go to the University of Toronto and start to teach there. So that was the real beginning of McLuhan starting to get an impact on people, though he's still not known. And Lewis and him didn't talk for 8 years, maybe 54, because McLuhan did an essay on Lewis in 53, and he wrote to Lewis and told him about the essay. Now you can look up the biography of Wyndham Lewis by Jeffrey Myers. That goes into the details of this conflict between them. Mm-hmm. So Lewis liked the paper, and then he put out a novel in 54 called Self-Condemned about his years in Toronto and a bit of the United States. And the main character in it is a guy named Mackenzie, a professor at the university in the Windsor area that Lewis renamed, called it Mumiko, I think, the town. So that's a very interesting thing to read, because in 54, McLuhan's starting to go, quote, past Lewis with the influence of James Joyce and Eliot and Yeats and Pound. He had a long correspondence from 48 to 53 with Pound. But it all started with Lewis. That was his real big inspiration. So now here's Lewis commenting on their relationship. Did you know that? This book called Self-Condemned.
No.
It's really worth reading. It's about his life in Toronto. It's about a character who was a famous professor in history in London. And he wrote a book in the 30s on the secret history of the coming war, or World War II or something. And it was very controversial. So he had to get the hell out of, like Lewis literally had to get out of London in 39 once the war started, because there were a lot of people who thought he was a far-right Nazi sympathizer. So he probably would have been arrested. So now, a neat story, Lewis was lucky. He and his wife get on the boat in France or someplace, and last minute said, no, there's a boat going tomorrow. We're not going to take this boat. So they took the next one. Well, the first boat got torpedoed and sunk. The second one, which left a day later, got across to New York, and he was still alive. So that was a lucky move. They were almost on that boat. So Self-Condemned comes out, and McLuhan he puts out Counterblast in 54, which is a echo of Lewis's famous journal in 1914 called Blast. So he says, I'm updating the Lewis tradition. I'm being a Lewisite. I'm being the counter environment. I'm being the enemy, in quotes. And so it's a very interesting small book version of the Blast that he did. But he's now starting to be his own thing, talking about media. So we go back to he's at St. Louis, and there's a friend of his, a Professor Bernard Muller-Tim. That's Muller-Phym. I don't know if it's a capital T or not. Bernard Muller-Tim. Mm-hmm. He is very much an expert at Thomas Aquinas. So he teaches McLuhan a lot in 39, 40, 41. Then he becomes controversial, Muller-Tim, and he has to leave the profession. But then he becomes a consultant. But McLuhan tells a story when Finnegans Wake came out in 39. He and Bernard were in a bar trying to read it. Okay, they were aware of the serialization, I'm pretty sure, and I think they had some interesting encounters with people coming by. They might have known them. So, what the hell is that? What are you looking at? So he did know what, probably might have had something clever to say. But he studies Joyce through the 40s. But he really gets hipped on Hugh Kenner because he had on T.S. Eliot because he meets a young kid from Ontario, Canada, that is really smart. Hugh Kenner becomes a famous critic based in the States, and he does the first book on Lewis in '54. But he was a great student of McLuhan, and somehow they both were more involved with Eliot at that point. So they're going to do a book together, but that fell apart. There's this private letter in the late '40s where Lewis is writing to his friend that I am going to focus on Lewis now, not so much Eliot. Now, Lewis was very controversial at that point. You maybe don't know his history. Yeah, he was basically banned in the '30s. And just to put his fantastic portraits of people like Eliot on the big Royal Museum there in '38 was a big scandal. So there was no popular appreciation or awareness of Lewis, but he was a critic on the Listener, or represented the Listener on the BBC. And he did whatever they had on the radio there. He was the critic for it. And so he started to get noticed by younger painters like Francis Bacon and a bunch of other guys. So that generation, they started to really promote Lewis to the point that his famous trilogy, The Human Age, was serialized on the BBC in the early '50s. But he's continuing to write. He writes a few more books, but he's blind. He writes while blind. It's incredible. And he dies in '57. Hugh Kenner visited him just before he died. Got material for his book, which in my mind, I said '54. I must have come out in '57, '58. I don't know. Did he do the book before? I don't know. I think he had to meet Lewis, sort of get the personal connection. But we can check that. If you quickly look at stuff, look at the date for Hugh Kenner, Kenner, book on title Wyndham Lewis. See if they take very long for you to get.
54.
54. Okay,
yeah.
So he wrote it before he met him, but he met him just before he died. So Kenner goes on. He starts to get a bit of a reputation. He does a book based on his PhD on Dublin and Joyce. So in 1950, a student from Yale who knew Clint Brooks and William Wimsatt, Wimsatt, they were one of the few people in North America that had McLuhan's PhD. So they used it and learned from it and cited. Now, Don Thiel was a student of those guys, so he heard about McLuhan from them. Now, in 1950, he knew the Korean War was starting, so he wanted to avoid being drafted. So he said, I'm going up to Canada, University of Toronto. Is there anybody up there I should look into? There's either, I think whoever recommended said, good, there's Northrop Frye and there's Marshall McLuhan. So do both or pick one. So he goes up there. He's very inspired by McLuhan more than Northrop Frye.
Yeah.
And so in 1950, this summer, he meets McLuhan. And he's 22 years old because he's born in 1928. And he it shows an interest in the wake that McLuhan didn't see in students. For example, in the '40s, if Joyce was taught, when he was taught by McLuhan, the students had to go to look at Ulysses. They had to go to a locked up vault where the university kept the book. The students weren't allowed to casually discover it, too pornographic or whatever. So that's how bad Joyce was back then for the establishment in academia, that they wouldn't let the kids see Ulysses. Forget Finnegans Wake; they probably never really knew it existed. But McLuhan is he's teaching it a little bit, and and Thiel, because he's interested, they form a little Finnegans Wake reading group in '50-51. So they make all kinds of breakthroughs with it. And in '53, McLuhan writes an essay on James Joyce. And he makes the astounding statement that Finnegans Wake is about media or forms of communication as art forms. What? What does that mean? how does stupid radio and Jack Benny and the Marx Brothers, how could that be serious study for a Gutenberg institution like the universities? But he did that in '53. And let's see. Don't know. I don't think anybody noticed that statement. But he started in late 53, going into 54. His first issue was December 53. He started a journal called Explorations, which made an impact. It was very unique. And McLuhan and his anthropologist friend Ted Carpenter did it. And Don Thiel, as the young, enthusiastic, bright student, helped him, became the secretary of the journal, and helped him write the proposal to Ford Foundation in 52 or so. And they actually got a grant, like $40,000 or something, which was a lot of money. And the other professors at the university said, what the hell are these upstarts, these nobody kids? They got this grant. How'd that happen? But they knew what was up, and that's a whole other story. So they started the journal, and in the second or third issue, young Don Thiel wrote an essay on Finnegans Wake, and who was it? Was it Carol Gideon? I think it's Carol Gideon, wife of Siegfried Gideon, who was a big influence on McLuhan in the early 40s, even before he got really involved with Lewis in 43, 44. And she writes an essay. It was Gideon, because they knew Joyce well, and they got him to move to Switzerland. They were Swiss in 40 when the Nazis had taken over France. And he had moved down to the Vichy area, and then he went to Switzerland sometime in 40, maybe late 40, and maybe he's there 6 months or something, and then he dies. So he died with Gideon and Carol, Carole, Carol Gideon. They buried him. So they had a very close relationship with Joyce. And so Don Thiel writes this essay in the second issue of Explorations in 54, and Carol Gideon writes that this is the best thing I've ever read on Finnegans Wake in particular, and Joyce in general. This is incredible. Now, Don Thiel, that's Theall, he was influenced by McLuhan a lot. And so McLuhan was behind the scenes there. But Thiel was a smart enough kid to understand McLuhan and make up his own version of it. And so it got noted by the main people around Joyce in the end of his life that buried him, which is incredible, right? So that started to get people talking about this journal. So it became quite famous in whatever world spin-off, fringe academia or something, maybe mainstream, I don't know, throughout the 50s, and it stopped in 59. But McLuhan's making references to Joyce. Now, in 57, he does a special issue by himself. And he has an edition. It was always him and Carpenter, but then, and other famous people writing essays. But at the end, in 57, issue number 8, McLuhan, Carpenter did something else. I think he had a TV show in Toronto. So McLuhan wrote all these essays, 24 of them. And then they had a part 2 where these aesthetes and more artistic-oriented people, academics of art history, they did a few essays. So McLuhan did one called The Third Program in the Human Age. And the Human Age had come out in 55. That was a trilogy by Lewis. And so he writes this incredible article saying that Wyndham Lewis was the first en bloc, ENBLOC, the first guy to deal with media as art form, so to speak, like what he had said in 53. And so he really praises Lewis and all that. It gives more significance to them than Joyce, but and Eliot. He said they did that in a minor level compared to Lewis. But it was controversial to talk about Lewis. And in 62, I knew a couple of students of McLuhan in 62. And they said McLuhan announced he's not going to do literary criticism anymore. It's over. He's going into media stuff. And that's because he discovered Harold Innis in the late 40s, early 50s, who was a professor of economics and maybe political science at the University of Toronto, who actually started talking about history, emphasizing media as the ground, technologies. So he did a book on the fur trade, and then he did a book called The Empire and Communications, goes through the whole history of the world, showing how media, starting back, with Egypt and that, determined space-oriented culture or a time-oriented culture. And then the effect of the alphabet in that. There was another character at that time, but he'd gone to Harvard in the late 40s named Eric Havelock, and he wrote a book, Preface to Plato, similar to Innis. So McLuhan he discovered Innis in 51 when Innis put out a book called The Bias of Communication, so the bias of media. And he cites McLuhan's Mechanical Bride, which came out in 51 in the book. And McLuhan as a younger professor. This Innes guy was the top guy at the University of Toronto. He had a lot of prestige, international and all that. They eventually named a college after him. McLuhan was amazed. This guy quoted or referred to his book. Mm-hmm. And so he started to write to him. And there's a famous letter in the Letters of Marshall McLuhan, I guess March 1452. It's incredible what McLuhan lays out his agenda more than what he was telling Pound. Pound didn't understand McLuhan at that end point of their correspondence. And so Innes dies in 52. So that left McLuhan to pick up the new tradition, the retrieval of whatever it was, later called media ecology. And they took off in 53 with that grant they got. So the last issue McLuhan really got involved in, number 8, he emphasizes Lewis. And in 59, Tate Carpenter puts one out. He was an anthropologist, so he did a whole book on Eskimo realities. That was the old term for the first natives of Canada, northern Canada. They're now called the Inuit, Inuit. So McLuhan got to do his book in 57, dominate the issue. And then number 9, 59, which was the actual last one, Carpenter, that was his issue. So McLuhan is starting to look at the effect of the satellite and Sputnik in 57, the Russian satellite. So he starts thinking about it. And by 1960, he's sneaking little statements about it, about satellites and that into his writings. He's a bit known now for media, but only in academic circles. And in 62, he puts out the Gutenberg Galaxy. And that's when he really starts quoting Joyce a lot. I think Joyce is quoted the most of any source in that issue, in that book in 62. And that's when he becomes known as a Joycean.
That was originally going to be, that wasn't going to be called the Gutenberg Galaxy, right? Wasn't it going to be called A Journey into the Wake or something like that?
That's a good point. Yeah. Introduction short introduction or the means to get into Finnegans Wake. I think he was basing the idea. You study me, McLuhan said, you'll be able to handle the wake a lot faster than years of stumbling around. So it's funny. Don Thiel has that title in his book. I haven't thought about that for a long time. That's so Gutenberg Galaxy had Finnegans Wake in its title, that it was about Finnegans Wake, crying out loud, in 62. And nobody knew the book. And he got, Northrop Frye was leading the Governor General's Award, a Canadian literary prestige prize. And he reluctantly, because he had a lot of disagreements with McLuhan, even though they were friends at the university, he reluctantly said, we're going to have to give the Gutenberg Galaxy, we're going to have to give it, whatever it is, this crazy book, an award as the best book of the year in literature. So that got him to attention in 63 or so. And can't remember the guy's first name, but on the panel or an article, I have it in my archives, talking about the award, there's several other people, they might have been got awards themselves, but one of the guys in the picture is a guy named Dobbs, Sinclair Dobbs, I think his name was. So we now make a lot of hay out of that. Obviously, Bob was working behind the scene, but that's a pretty neat coincidence. But so then Understanding Media comes out in 64. And that's not just about the printing press. That's about all media. And people wouldn't even consider media. What, you're analyzing money? Who the hell does that? You're an English professor. And so he did all the new technology. So it was an incredible success, that book. And then the paperback in 67. So you get to see images of Joyce and quotes from Joyce in this paperback that kids in school were, college or high school, were looking at, and they're finding out this guy who couldn't write a clear sentence. I called James Joyce. So he then puts out in 68 a book, War and Peace in the Global Village, designed by the same guy, lots of pictures, and it's littered with quotes from Joyce. I think 93 quotes. It's incredible. Nobody was from Finnegans Wake. I mean, he was applying Finnegans Wake. Nobody even knew what it was. In that book this is the point we're getting to. 1968. First point is Eric had taken over the dialogue between Thiel and McLuhan in the early 50s. Thiel went on to do other things and left the University of Toronto. And but Eric, 10 years later, 64, 65, he was a pilot in America, and he went there and liked flying or something. So he had a bit of he was born in the States, so he's an American citizen, born around 42 or so, 43. So he comes back, and his father's getting famous, so he's an intellectual. So I'm going to jump onto this. So he starts dialoguing regularly with McLuhan in the backyard, and their neighbor was Glenn Gould. You ever heard of him? Gould?
Yeah.
Famous American, Canadian.
Pianist, right?
Yeah, composer.
Yeah.
Zappa wannabe is what I say. Frank Zappa wannabe. But most people don't
Glenn
agree with that.
Gould was a Zappa wannabe?
Oh, yeah. That's a whole other story. But anyways, the Glenn Gould would listen to them. The neighbor, he was a friend of McLuhan, appreciated McLuhan's avant-garde nature. And maybe even through talking to McLuhan, he got the idea of dropping out of the concert hall part of his life, and just went into recording and studio work. But he used to hear the two of them laughing, talking, and analyzing Finnegans Wake. Well, by 66, Eric had put together a book based on the 10 Thunders. Do you know about the first long word on page 3, the first page of Finnegans Wake?
If
you look at it,
the first thunder. Yeah. So that's Paleolithic to Neolithic, right?
Yeah, and that's on one level. There's other levels we can get into.
Yeah.
That was the first thunder. It's 100 letters. There's 9 more, making 10 thunders. And the 10th thunder has 101 letters. That's page 424. And it's about television, says Eric. And it has an extra letter to make it 1001. And then you get the Arabian Nights. The 1001 stories of the Arabian Nights is a subplot there. So there's Eric in 66. He had laid this out in 66 and tried to get it published. McLuhan had a stroke or something in the fall of 67. He's in New York at Fordham for a year in a sabbatical, and Eric's down there with him, and they're not getting the book published. So then McLuhan got the book contract to do War and Peace and Global Village after Medium is the Massage, and they put Eric's 10 Thunders in there. And I read that in 68. Wow, what is this? Crazy stuff. There's some order in the book, some way to look at it with the history of technologies, 10 levels through, linear time, so to speak. Let's see. That is McLuhan having a book with a lot of quotes. He's announcing himself as an extreme serious Joycean. But I've given you the history of what he's gone through. He knew Joyce was important when he did his PhD, but he got interested in Eliot, and then he met Lewis, and then he got interested in Eliot, but he also was interested in Lewis, but Lewis buzzed off for 10 years. And then he got involved with Pound from 49 to 54. Really good, important correspondence there. So McLuhan was learning from the men of 1914, they were called. Joyce, Lewis, Pound, Eliot.
Yeah.
Is that it? Maybe Yeats, Joyce, Lewis, Pound, and Eliot. Yeats in the background. But generally those 4 guys. And he's an expert on all that. And I guess in regular fuddy-duddy academia, they didn't understand those guys, right? Yet. The 60s exploded everybody, which is the era of not the global village, but the global theater in McLuhan terms. That made everybody, and LSD and drugs are happening. Everything got disrupted, so everything started to look like Finnegans Wake for these professors. It looked like a page of it, and that was a key point. McLuhan then he did laws. Let me see. He did a whole bunch of books. And he had an economist, British intelligence guy, Barrington Nevitt. He brought in the top-down stuff, we call it, right? The conspiracy theory stuff, what were intelligence agencies doing with this new media knowledge. And that dominated a bit of McLuhan in the early 70s. And then he did laws of media, but then he died in 1980, the last day. And so laws of media didn't come out until 1988. And that was another level of organizing, answering scientists, putting his work into order. You know about that book, Laws of Media?
I don't know, no.
Okay. So we should focus. So that's McLuhan. Does that give you
That's
how it happened.
yeah, exactly. That's how it happened. So my next question for you would be, I mean, maybe not to do with McLuhan. How would you describe? Because for people who've maybe just either just heard of Finnegan's Wake or have
Yeah.
opened it one time, I mean, how would you describe it as a book?
Okay. So as I started seriously reading Finnegans Wake in after that book came out in 68, so 68, 69.
Hmm.
And I've done it. So that's 50 years or more. I've been looking at it. What is this thing? And but I've read lots of critics and lots of different views, so I'm pretty encyclopedic about the reaction to the wake. But McLuhan's always the most interesting. So in the early 20s, when shortwave radio came in, Joyce started listening to that. And he's in Paris and he can listen to Dublin and Germany and whatever stations he can pick up. And he basically can go back home again. He can listen to these Irish people that he had a ambiguous, ambivalent relationship with. He liked Ireland, but he hated it, and all that stuff. So he was able to tune in. So he's saying, what the heck is this going to do to us writers? This is a whole new technology, new invention, new showbiz. What's going to happen? And movies are happening, cars and telephones and airplanes. It's after World War II. So he started going up and down the dial. So he said to himself, and there's glimpses that this is what happened, but I'm wrapping up years of looking into this, what I say now. And Joyce said, what would a page, if I'm presenting the present, I did that in Ulysses, but it's based in 1904, supposedly, but it echoes Greek times and whatever was coming by 1922 when the book Ulysses came out. So he picks up writing something as soon as the book is out in 22. He is now composing new stuff, which is very interesting. And but he's listening to shortwave radio, or that starts to enter his life in this period. And by 1924, he starts serializing the book. It's not published, but he starts getting the more avant-garde journals to take excerpts of what he's writing, early manuscript stuff. And of course, everybody is pissed off at him. Like, you're a fucking idiot. He was hoping to impress H.G. Wells and Pound and these people. They all basically dumped him. After a few years of this, they couldn't tolerate this. Joyce was writing like a baby or like a monkey, say. But the Wyndham Lewis was smart, and he already was aware of media dynamics. And I wouldn't be surprised if Joyce was reading early Lewis, especially his book, The Art of Being Ruled in 1926, a major opus that McLuhan said to Harold Innis in his letter, March 14th, 1952, that this is the most important book for social policy since Machiavelli's The Prince. That's a major statement about a book that probably weren't even many copies made, not that many people reading it. But see, Lewis in the early 20s had retreated after Ulysses came out, and he's a bit jealous or concerned. Well, what the hell? My friend Joyce, they were friends, and it's getting to be a big deal. I don't like the direction he's taking. So he retreated, and he wrote a book he wrote 1,500 pages or some huge thing called Man of the World, I think was the title. And so that was like from 23 to 26. So he chopped it up into 5 books approximately and released them from 26 to 30, culminating in Apes of God, which came out in 1930. And that was a satire of the Bloomsbury Group, which was a literary avant-garde establishment. And that caused so much scandal. Everybody was pissed off at Lewis, but it really put his name on the map, that book, Apes of God. And Captain Beefheart later said he had his wife read it to him. He said, that's the greatest book I ever heard or read. So Captain Beefheart understood the value of Lewis. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, but I've been listening to a lot of Beefheart lately, so that's good to know.
That's good to know. And David Bowie celebrated. I think he said Lewis was the first cyberpunk. There's a book out that came out a few years ago, British rock and roll and Wyndham Lewis, and it's all about how Lewis influenced people like Bowie and some guy in The Fall, I think, some band called The Fall, and other people, and Beefheart. So I digress. So that's Lewis, and so Joyce is listening to shortwave radio, and he thought, okay, I go up and down the dial, get all these languages. I'll put that on a page, a collage of the languages, because that's what we're living today. not everybody, but in Europe, if people are listening to shortwave radio, this is a new media experience. It's bigger than a book, bigger than a movie, maybe. So he came up with that was his first notion. Show the shortwave hidden ground, McLuhan would call it, the invisible new technology that people haven't, it hasn't become constitutive. That means everybody's doing it. So, by the early 50s, television is constitutive in North America, in Canada, and United States, because so many people are now using it. It's a major competitor to movies and books and magazines and newspapers. So, but shortwave radio was not constitutive in early 20s, but this 1920s. But the thing is, the military, the Nazis, and whoever else, the British, are looking at these things as military technology. So they're always avant-garde in their way. So Joyce's interest in radio is climax when he's down in Vichy, the enemy territory, the French part of the population that sided with let the Nazis take over and went along with it. He's down there hiding out, and the Nazis come down and invade wherever he is. And Joyce is playing the radio, and the neighbors can hear it. And it's a rule that when the Nazis come around, you shut off the radio. Joyce refused to turn it off. That's either suicidal, he's depressed, and he didn't mind being killed, but it's pretty blatant for a guy who retreated, in the 30s and was never political. And he once said to his friends, Hitler's coming up, let him take over, no big deal. So, a lot of radical socialists and communists and lefties of that period, they were dominant, really didn't like Joyce and what he was doing, even though they didn't understand what he was doing. But they thought he should be not writing baby drivel. He should be out there wherever, creating a resistance to the Nazis. So, but he's so brave personally that he refused to turn the radio off. And so the professor who found this out, I attended a talk by him, and I don't know how it ends. I don't know what happened. They put up with it or they blew it up. It blew up his radio. I don't know, but they didn't kill him. But he was dead within a few months anyway. So anyways, that Joyce would love listening to the radio. So did Lewis when he was, and Lewis was the first of the men of 1914 to be on TV. Just before he ran away in 1939, he was on a TV panel in London. Mm-hmm. And at the end of Eric McLuhan learns a lot about Joyce and Lewis through his father, and then figures out how to apply the thunders through the assistance of Harold Innis and his media knowledge that was starting to become sort of academically interesting, though eventually both he and McLuhan were, quote, suppressed. They weren't picked up on. Maybe by now, since McLuhan got retrieved because of the internet in the early 90s in Wired magazine, maybe Innis is taken seriously again now. But let's see. So Joyce is into radio, and what will it do to the book? So he makes a book that merges radio and book, whereas Ulysses, many people see the stream of consciousness as like a movie, like movie dynamics. So he made it book and movie, an earlier technology in Ulysses in 1922, and then in 1939, when Finnegans Wake came out, it was mating radio and book. So a famous Canadian composer named Murray Schafer, ever heard of that name?
No.
He's a big deal in Canada and internationally, influenced by John Cage and that. So he, in 52, early 50s, was a student of McLuhan. And he said McLuhan would sit in the class. He put everybody in a circle, and he'd sit in the middle and rotate his chair around.
There's an interview of him doing that on...
Yes, CBC.
Yeah,
famous one in 67 or so. And but he used to do that in class 15 years before, and it was a controversial professor. But Schafer said there's a really important thing that he learned and passed on. I'm glad I heard it, many years ago. He said, McLuhan says, you've got to look at this strange book. It's not a book. It's a radio program. That's how you begin to look at the Wake. It's not a book. It's a radio program. Now, what that does is that you don't worry about the semantic meanings of every line with 60 languages on each page. You're never going to get anywhere with that, right? So you might have fun and get in a group and have a reading club and enjoy the different meanings everybody gets. But most people, get frustrated. I want to know the meaning of this book. What's it for? Well,
Yeah.
McLuhan figured out what it was for. And then his son did a PhD eventually, came out in 82 on what's called Menippean thunder at Finnegans Wake. And Menippean satire is something that McLuhan and Don Thiel knew about in the early 50s. Not many people knew about it. It's the famous writer Bakhtin, Bakhtin. You ever heard of him, the Russian guy?
Yeah.
He kind of popularized some point when he wrote about it in the 60s, 70s, 80s, whenever he did it. He brought back attention on Menippean satire. But McLuhan and Thiel already knew about it. And McLuhan became a Menippean satirist. He didn't admit it publicly until he wrote a letter to one guy in 1976, told him. But then the letters came out, 10 years later in 88, so we can see what he wrote. So, but Eric was taking advantage of, inside access to Marshall McLuhan's knowledge. So he wrote a PhD on the Menippean aspect of the 100 thunders. I mean, the 10 thunders, 1,001 letters. What you're reading this page and there's this long thing. So he said, oh, well, that's a noise. Somebody made a noise. And there's another one on page 23 and another one on page 44, another one on page 90. And there's 10 of them. You discover them. Why are these noises? What are these? What's making these noises? So you told me that you read Skeleton Key to Finnegans Wake the first time you looked at the wake, or helped you through it. Yes, start with that. It's simple. But it gives you a way, as McLuhan says, people need concepts to understand the perceptual environment we're in. The purge is beyond concept. It's your needs and instincts reacting to the sensory effects of the environment before you have ideas about it. You might have ideas, but they're usually rear view mirror. So concepts are not as important as percepts for McLuhan, but he did an interview by Richard Castellanos, a famous New York artist and critic, history of avant-garde theater. He interviewed a really good interview in January 67 with McLuhan, and McLuhan says to him, well, concepts are necessary. It gives people a way to get a grasp on reality. So if you want to read McLuhan and interpret his concepts, go ahead. But eventually he's talking about percepts, and then you have to get that. So what is Finnegans Wake? It's pure percept. What concept can you get to? Now, there's a million concepts in there, but what's the ground? What's the main concept? So that's the dilemma for the literate person reading the book. They're trying to find out the conceptual ground basis of it. What is the major theme? There's many themes, but what is the point? Is this book a joke? Is that the theme? It's a joke? Is it Joyce gone schizoid? Some people thought that he went crazy. And now Lewis in 1928, the book it's not going to come out for another 11 years, but he starts his Human Trilogy, which he completes in the 50s, but the first volume is 1928 called The Childer Mass, or Massacre of the Children. I think it's a term in Christian theology, the Childer Mass, some aspect of it I don't have in my mind right now. You have to understand that this is old stuff for me. I haven't done it in a long time, and I'm just going on what I remembered with a few notes. But it's timely because I'm thinking of writing an essay on Finnegans Wake, and I'm going to talk about that later. So but I'm just giving you what I learned 50, 60 years ago, how it started. It made the book easier. If you look at the form, then as you get more expert in reading McLuhan, you realize Marshall was translating Finnegans Wake. That's why it goes back to the important quote you made, that you got to know Joyce in depth to know what I'm doing. Right? And you got to know the symbolists before them. And so what does that mean? It means that he's looking at the forms of things rather than the content so much, which then becomes McLuhan's the medium, or the form is the message. It's the massage and message, which in the message is normally seen as content. So McLuhan, so how would you write Finnegans Wake if you're looking at what he called the language of forms? You wouldn't write about the German line and the Austrian line and the French line and the Swahili line on page 10 and try to get out where those semantic meanings lead. You would say, wait a minute, this is about language. But if you go to page 52, it says television kills telephony and brothers broil, the middle of the page. He's talking about other media, not just language. This is not a regular book. It's not about words and written stuff. There's some other media dynamic. So when McLuhan talks about speech and understanding media, speech is a first medium containing all experience. And then he goes into the effect of an oral society, and then a writing society. And then he talks about what the form of writing does to people, as particularly the phonetic alphabet. And then he talks about the printing press, how that changed everything. That's when humans like to say, or at least Western science says, the Renaissance was when human knowledge, skyfolded tenfold times, right? Just multiplied itself. They all like talk about the great Renaissance and how our human knowledge just escalated. But that was due to printed press. Associates of mine call the printed press the Dark Age. The next 300 years is the Dark Age, if you're orally biased or tactile, which is all not a sense, but the interplay of senses. Tactility is really important. Basically, the men of 1914 are doing tactility, but nobody recognizes it. But McLuhan figured it out with the help of Pound and Lewis, and talking to his anthropologist friend, Edmund Carpenter, who spent much time up there in the north with Eskimos and lived with them. So they're a very tactile culture. All Aboriginal cultures are mainly tactile. A good example is in Thailand. To have a sense of mystery, like in England, you might say, I know it like the back of my hand. What do they say in Thailand? And England being a visually biased culture, but in Thailand, they don't have any printed books or anything for thousands of years, and never did, maybe. They have a different sensibility. They have tactility as their basic sensory structure. And so what's the phrase for their culture? The dance of words among, I forgot it. I think it's a dance of meaning among words. The interplay of talking and thought and speaking. Talking, speaking, dancing, body language. The dance of thought among words, the dance of the mind among words, can't remember, but the dance, the interplay, when they had, I really know it, I'm dancing, man. And I'm in the interplay between thought and words. Okay, that's what they did. They're in the gap, as McLuhan would say, the tactile gap, because it's not a sense, it's the interplay. It coordinates the sensory data and makes a surface consciousness. So why am I saying that? So the tactility. So McLuhan would talk about the electric environment as tactile. It's not oral, it's tactile. So he's describing what Joyce is showing in the book. He's writing a tactile book. And the reason he is because the technology, the electric environment, radio, TV, and computers is making us different from book people. So you're going to have to make a different kind of book. It's not going to be a book. It's going to be a book with multi-meanings, multi-semantics, and multimedia. So McLuhan translates Phineas Wake, redoing the 10 Thunders by writing the history of technologies and media. Media is his term for anything humans created, from finger tweezers to bulldozers. And then that's hardware. And then there's software media, electric media. All these media are what Joyce is talking about. And that's the ground, and the 10 Thunders guide you. And in Eric's PhD, came out in 82, he analyzes the 100 letters of each thunder and shows echoes in the pages around the thunder with meanings relating to what the words are in the thunder, once you figure out what the words are in the thunder. So it's quite an achievement, his book, his PhD, which became a book in 97 called The Role of Thunder in Phineas Wake. The word Menippean is not in the title, as it was in his PhD. So you look at McLuhan describing media and what they do to our senses and our bodies and society and psychologies and anthropology and every ology there is. The ground of determining this is the media environment. And that's what the wake is. And if you're going to describe it, you talk about the forms, not the content. You're never going to find out what the what did HC do? Did they actually do something?
I'm interested because McLuhan at some point. Let me see if I can get this the right way around. He says that a new technology, the content of it is the previous medium. Is that right? Is that
exactly.
the right way around?
Yep.
Yeah. So how does the wake
do that?
How does it wake relate to that? Because it seems in that sense that Joyce is out of time, right? Because he's drawing shortwave radio, this new medium, into the old form of writing. Like he seems he's really messed around with McLuhan's linear way that mediums and content flow.
That's right. In other words, he's picking up on it. Is that what you're saying? Picking up
Uh,
on McLuhan?
well, what Joyce?
Yeah.
Well, he's okay. So if we have like radio and then we go to TV, so
Yeah.
the new medium would be TV. The content of the new medium. Am I right in thinking that McLuhan thought it was the old? The content of the
Radio.
new medium was the old medium. Was the
Yeah.
form of
Media,
the
movies, and radio. The
yeah.
the radio series, they're all series, and they went on TV. Jack Benny and these guys.
Okay.
They went on TV doing their radio stuff, and and then a feature in early American TV in the 50s and 60s was the Late Late Show or the Late Show, where some old movie would be shown to end the TV broadcasting day. They didn't have all day broadcasting back then, all day, all night. So McLuhan made that. See, look, subconsciously, we know movies now. These are movies that people long forgotten and never took seriously are now being represented in a new medium, and we can't see the actual nature of television, so we see the old one in a new light. We see it as an art form. We re-look at it. And McLuhan writes in his 1968 book that people were shocked to see these old movies. They'd forgotten how naive they were back then,
And
as shown
do
in
you
the
think
movie.
that's what Joyce is doing with the Wake in terms of the literary form?
That's what he's in. Now, Pound, Eliot, and Joyce and Lewis, they went through World War One, and a very good student of McLuhan went to the States and became a professor, Vincent Sherry. He did a book on World War One and the effect it had on the society in Britain. And everybody was upset with the information overload, the war dynamics, the war news. And after a while, because the war was always changing, the government was saying things that they didn't say a year ago. They contradict themselves. So a lot of people said the government's lying. But Joyce, and being aesthetes in a way, they're looking at this. They're not going to get so judgmental. They're going to say, what's going on here? And that's when they started to, Joyce changed his Ulysses in 1916, basically based on Lewis's play called The Enemy of the Stars in 1914, Enemy of the Stars. And it's Charlie Chaplin time. And Eliot is doing it in his way. And Pound's trying to write an epic. They're all trying to figure out how to write an epic about basically the end of the Gutenberg era, the end of the book and all the culture it came from, going back to Homer. So there's very interesting quotes that McLuhan would use from Eliot on that theme, and great quotes by Pound and Lewis and Joyce especially. So Joyce, Eliot figures out something's going on. Not Eliot. Lewis figures out something's going on here. That Joyce is onto something. I'm not sure what it is, but I am going to satirize it. So in the middle of the Chaldermas, 1928, there's a whole section written in Finnegans. Lewis's sort of crummy version of Finnegans. It's just ridiculous. People are saying, reading along, all of a sudden there's several pages of nonsense. Why? You know what I mean? What are we supposed to get out of this nonsense? But he was no longer a friend of Joyce. They had a falling out. So they're reading each other, but they're not talking. Too bad they didn't get together and talk more about what they both were seeing. So this idea of the old environment becomes art form, that's a major idea in McLuhan. Yeah. That's the dynamic of formal interplay. So people live in the moment like you and I. We see the present. We don't understand the implications of today until maybe tomorrow, right? Mm-hmm. Is your wife going to divorce you? I don't know if you're married, but you're going to be divorced by tomorrow, and you don't see it coming on the day before, right? Mm. But what you're thinking about is, if you're on the way to get divorced, thinking of old girlfriends from the past, right? Old art forms. So you're thinking about, you can think in your mind about what you already experienced.
I'm single, Bob. I don't have to worry about any of this.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so on the extensions of human, the male-female drama, I guess, externalized in the eye versus the ear, eye media versus ear media. That's talking and oral culture, folklore versus print person. Mm-hmm. Now, this guy, Vincent Sherry, who did a book on World War I's disruption of everybody's sense of decorum to the max in World War One, and then picked up by the aesthetes. He also did a book on the radical modernism of Wyndham, Lewis, and Ezra Pound, which is incredible. And he talks about the respectable intellectual debate in the 19th century, where literate guys did not like the new musical dance that was coming in thanks to the telegraph in the 1850s. And an oral culture was being retrieved. What's his name? Baudelaire and Rimbaud and these people. Uh, that the intellectuals argued over whether you're pro-eye or pro-ear. So the eye-ear discussion that Wyndham Lewis brings to his criticism of James Joyce in Time in Western Man, 1927, a year before the Finnegans in 1928 in Chalmers, he does a whole long essay showing how Joyce is a rearview mirror guy celebrating time, the dimension of time.
I was about to just bring that in actually, because
Go ahead.
the structure of the book begins. The wake begins with River Run, which is River Run is this kind of a Heraclitean flux. You're already in the middle of something, and this first sentence then links back round to the last sentence of the book, transforming it into a cycle. And the book itself is also the cyclic. What's his name? Giambattista Vico.
Yes.
The fourfold structure of history of cycles. But equally, when we draw that into the McLuhan understanding of media, like when you're listening to the radio, more so these days when you're on the internet, you're watching TV, you're constantly existing within temporality that is completely folded, right? I can go on the internet and click and watch a film from 1940, right? And it's recalibrated in that sort of way of temporal folding. So like time being thrown into that.
And space. Both are gone. Both are gone. So you look at Einstein. He turns time and space into an art form and gets it out of the rigid conditioning of Newton, visual space and time and space, because Newton is in the Gutenberg Galaxy effect and doesn't know it. But Einstein is experiencing the electric effect, so he's being altered unconsciously or consciously, and he knows he got to change the visual organization of physics to a post-visual. And that's what he attempted with the space-time relativity talk. See, you can see the changes in the arts and sciences across the board due to this new medium. But people don't know it's the big medium, the invisible medium, that's doing this. So Joyce and Lewis intuited this somehow, a little bit anyways. And then McLuhan worked with both of them to consolidate it and perfect what the men of 1914 were groping for, and came up with a new art and a new science. But I was talking about the rearview mirror thing. So the movie makes the book an art form. That's the old medium. So Joyce picks up on that, and people read it in Ulysses in the 20s, and they found it hard to follow. Seemed surrealistic or stream of consciousness, a lot of discontinuity. They didn't recognize that that's what they experienced daily with the movie form, the discontinuous unfolding of imagery. This is what Joyce is doing. So the hidden ground of Ulysses is the movie, and he takes the book, an old medium, and updates the book and adapts it to the new dynamic, the new century preferences and bias of the new environment. He stops
it being an art form.
Well, art form is people making money out of it. Okay, that's normal life. And Pope Alexander Pope wrote an epic poem called the Dunciad in 1742, criticizing how the printing presses made everybody stupid. And this is a guy who makes a living out of being a poet and all that, right? But he doesn't like the low culture stuff that's happening. He doesn't like us. He doesn't like our kind of program. We're a bunch of amateurs. We don't even know who our audience is. So what was I saying? So so Pope, being perceptive, said there's something wrong here. We need to do a little media ecology, cut back in the production of books. Let's put all booksellers out of business for a while, for 6 months, have a media fast. He is the first to come up with that. And then, what is that? 300 years later? 200 years later, in 1942, out comes a book finishing the Gutenberg era, that's Finnegans' Wake, doing media ecology more consciously than Pope did in the Dunciad. But Pope is a big deal in Finnegans' Wake. Belinda, the hen, that's named after a Pope, Alexander Pope character. So so you see, in Finnegans' Wake, he has a line, pastimes. So pastimes are playtime, pastimes. See, that's right there in Finnegans' Wake. So you see, once you read McLuhan, you wouldn't even know it yourself, as the average uneducated people we are, especially the MK Ultra program they've done on us, right? So we got no minds, but we can't know that. But if you're lucky, you meet McLuhan, he points out, oh, Joyce had pastime as pastimes back then, and then you start looking at it through McLuhan's lens, and the wake becomes easy. So I actually, in 1985, sat down. I was on the radio. No, not quite on the radio. My friend Bob Marshall was doing my stuff on the radio. The top down, May Brussels, Sherman Scully, LaRouche, Dr. Beater stuff, and MK Ultra stuff, Walter Boat. I was the first, me and Bob Marshall was the first to do a radio show, not being left, right, or center, but looking at everybody and making a collage out of it. We were the first to do that, long before Alex Jones. So, but in 85, I had time. So I said, okay, I'll go to page 3 of Finnegans Wake, get out Roland McHugh and the annotations, which had come out in 1980, and have Eric's PhD, which I had gotten in 82, 83, and read. And I was one of the first people to read that, and that put me ahead of everybody. And Joseph Campbell. So I go through those 3 books, McLuhan, Roland McHugh, and Skeleton Key, and I do a page a night. About a page, and it took me about 2.5 years. I have it written on that original copy. I can end sometime in 87. Starting in 85, I think I probably started February 2nd, 85, right there on Joyce's birthday and the day Ulysses came out. And I've got all these ideas that I'm saying to you in my mind, and I'm looking at it. And I went through, and boy, that was quite an experience because it made sense to me. I could understand it. And I could catch up to the McLuhan's level. I could see the value of what Roland McHugh did with all the encyclopedic, gleanings from all these previous scholars and getting the semantic content down, and then the simple mythic Joseph Campbell angle on Skeleton Key.
Yeah.
But the thing is, McLuhan, I have seen McLuhan's copy of Skeleton Key, and he says that Mr. Campbell has no clue about the Prank Queen. The Prank Queen is on page 23, and it's part of the Second Thunder. And it's about the effect of the alphabet. So the media level, Campbell doesn't see. Nobody sees that. So, but you see McLuhan's noting of the book. That's he's picking off things. He has C/A, that's cliche in relation to archetype all through the book, but not many sentences, just that one. Campbell loses it. And so I met Campbell in 78 in Toronto at a conference that McLuhan was scheduled to speak at, but he didn't come to it.
But is that because you were there? He knew you were going to be
there? Yeah, something like that. Or he knew Campbell was going to be there. Because I spoke to Campbell and I said, McLuhan was supposed to, I know the dynamic between, nobody knows, it's between, not friendly, between McLuhan and Campbell. And so I said, McLuhan was supposed to be here. What do you think of his interpretation of Wake? And he frowned and spits and says, oh, he just fucking basically walks away from me for bringing it up. So years later, when I did the archive, let me see. I did the archive 3 years later in late 80, 2 years going into 81, starting the third year. But somewhere in there, I found a letter. Maybe Mrs. McLuhan gave it to me. Eric writing to Campbell right around that time, opening a dialogue. Hey, we're interested in what you've done. We'd like to talk to you about your work, blah, blah, blah. The question is, this conference was in 79. And the question is, he would have read the letter, but that might have been why he frowned. But I didn't know about the letter when I talked to him in 79, right? But years later, I found that Eric was trying to bridge the gap because he was still probably working on his PhD and all that. So he wanted to see if the letter's in 78, this is before his PhD is completed in 82. So there's a drama there going on that Eric tries to bridge, but nothing happens. Then Campbell becomes more famous than McLuhan was in a way with his Bill Moyers TV series, and then it becomes part of pop culture and new age woo-woo talking and find your bliss and all that stuff. He becomes a big deal, right? He doesn't need to worry about McLuhan. But I had the knack of running around, being at the right place at the right time. I know the hidden ground or hidden scandals, the hidden gossip of everybody in all worlds because of my luck. I mean, here he was right there, and I knew what to bring up, right? Marshall McLuhan. And we got and it was all a lovey-dovey conference, a new age conference, and he gets violent. Bring up McLuhan, and he knew to get away because maybe there'd be a fisticuffs right there. So, anyways, that's Bob the shit disturber, as people call me.
Well, all right. Well, I can segue. I can use that to segue because you said you are everybody. This is the three words that haunted McLuhan for most of his life after he got into Joyce, which is "Here comes everybody." The hell does that
Yes.
mean?
Oh, well, you got to think of electric media. If you're listening to shortwave radio, first of all, here comes all these countries.
Wait, we should say HCE is one of, if there is characters in this book, which there is, HCE is one of the main characters. Which
he's the main guy.
Yeah.
He's the husband, Humphrey Chimpton Earwicker, and his wife is Anna Olivia Pluribel, or ALP. You take the letters HCE and ALP, you'll get chapel. All right. And there's a lot about the chapel. The book ends with this view of a triptych on the wall of a chapel, in Dublin someplace, or in Ireland. That's in page like 620 or so, maybe 602. I'm not sure. But the thing is, the Rearview mirror. So we're talking about the book.
We're talking about Here Comes Everybody. HC.
Yeah, we're going to get to that, but I didn't finish the Rearview mirror effect, the old environment becoming art form. Yes, everybody is writing books in the 1800s, but it's basically to make a living out of it. If you're lucky, get some attention. You're not worried about the effects of the book, how it's fragmenting the church and causes a split in Protestantism and creates crazy scientists who are not poets anymore. They're not comprehensive, not encyclopedic. So, and specialism comes in. Nobody's noticing the effects of the book. They're just saying, "Oh, I love reading books." That's all they had back then. Look at how much people watch their smartphones and media. People love media, and so the addiction of people to cell phones and all that, their smartphones, is mined by people reading books a lot for a couple hundred years, and so they're being molded by it. So here comes this new environment. The serious new artists say, well, this will change us. Something will happen to us. So the book is irrelevant. So I did the greatest book. I ended the novel history with Ulysses in 1922. And I'm now not going to do a book, but I'm going to do what he calls a changing perception. I'm going to take the old environment, make it unrecognizable, and then revitalize the book and make a book as we move into electric age, be the only book that people read. And they now do it in many groups all over the world. In groups, they read the Wake. They work through it. They're not doing.
Yeah, I was going to say, where the hell do you go after the Wake?
Yeah, if you're a book person and you're addicted, well, you got to start realizing this new media, Ed Sullivan, the stupid shows, Ozzie and Harriet, Donald Duck, and all this stuff. It's not the content, it's the form, the mosaic mesh of television, which I probably talked a lot in our previous interviews, a bit about that anyways. The sensory dynamic, especially the extension of tactility. Electricity, what is it? We don't know what it is. It's some fucking energy or something, and everything goes with it. You got to plug it into electricity. So electricity is an extension, a metaphor of our tactility in our bodies. Tactile is the interplay of the senses, not a sense. That you could say it's the brain, the mind, and it organizes things. Well, electricity has organized the last 150 years. Turn off the electric environment, you got nothing. You're back to book writing, right? And newspapers, if you're lucky. So Joyce turned the old environment into an art form. And that becomes part of a four stages that McLuhan laid out. He said in the 60s, the media, actually Howard Gossey's the first admin to promote him, came up with this while hanging out with McLuhan. He said, a new medium is the last word. You remember that phrase? This is the last word in everything. It's the best. Well, after a while, a new last word comes along, obsolescence, or sidelines the old last word, which becomes a cliche. Now, there are many cliches the last 500 years that have been invented, the last words that became cliches, and there are a lot of cliche on the sideline environments people have forgotten about. So not many people think about the knight in shining armor, but you can retrieve an old cliche that was forgotten. This is phase 3, and it comes back as an archetype. So what retrieves the knight in shining armor? And it's now an archetype.
I don't know.
The automobile.
Okay. Which is a TV for McLuhan, right? Not
the automobile. The television replaces the automobile.
No, but McLuhan in one. I think this is in the Joyce lecture from '66 I'm doing you now. I'm saying a load of dates. It's the Joyce lecture from '66. He says that the automobile windscreen is a screen. And it's like
Okay, just a screen.
well,
No, but
okay. So he doesn't mean it's
here's
like a
what.
television. Okay.
No. It doesn't mean it's a television, but he's talking about the effect of television. Yes, there's something about the screen, but really shows it is in North America, where North Americans go out to be alone, because it's the only country built on the isolating effect of print. We go out to be alone, not home to be social, whereas everybody else, including you guys, go out to be social, the cafe pub culture, and go home to be alone. So you go out to be alone in North America because it's a wilderness. When you get a car, you tint it so nobody can see you. You got the black tint. I don't know if you've seen that. That's over the last 20 years. You
Mm-hmm.
can't see into people's cars. That's what happens to the car. It doesn't become a TV, but because of television and its constituent effect of our tactile senses, it's registered in older extensions of known senses like kinetic and movement. That's the car, the wheel extension of the feet. And you'll see changes in the car. So as cars no longer were status symbols, meaning part of the hidden ground that everybody was living in and wanted to be part of, once it becomes obsolete with airplanes and travel by television, you get people starting to buy little cars, Volkswagens and mini cars, and the Japanese take over for a while in the auto industries. That's a sensory change that affects economics caused by television's effect on the old medium of TV of the car. So the car does become an art form. It becomes a racing car. It becomes for teenagers a way of killing each other and playing chicken with each other. Back in the 50s with James Dean, the car is used all over the place for not just practical transportation. You know what I mean? It's
absolutely.
It's now you got other means to transport yourself. So that's an example of an old technology. Driving a car, most people might not think that's an art. It's not book writing or painting or sculpture, but it is an art because you got to know how to use your eye glancing and how to see things and use your proprioceptive sense. But technologically, it's an art in relation to humming technologies and older technologies. So the car is retrieved the night is retrieved as a car, and therefore that's the third phase. So something that I say it's retrieved as an archetype. Actually, that's the fourth phase. Here, we'll do it this way. You enhance something, that's the last word. You obsolesce something, that's a cliche. When you start to play with it consciously, like Joyce doing with the book, with Finnegans Wake, that's the book as art form, not an art form in the present that people make money from. It's aesthetically, it's a theory of art, a theory of perception that you come up with. And you have a whole idea, and you spend a lot of time explaining why you're writing an unreadable book. Okay, so that's because the book is an art form. After the book's been around and people know about Finnegans Wake as the most unreadable book in the world, and many cultures try to translate it and all that, it becomes archetype. So those are the four levels originally laid out by Howard Gossage, and McLuhan printed in a book called McLuhan, Hot and Cool. A guy edited all these arguments about McLuhan in '67. But McLuhan turned that into the Tetrad. I think you know about the Tetrad. So the last word is enhancing something new. The obsolescence phase is the cliche of the Howard Gossage thing. Retrieving a cliche becomes an archetype is the fourth level of archetype, whereas the third level was just art form in Gossage. So it was last word, cliche, art form, then archetype. So archetype is a huge art form. So going to a movie today is an archetypal experience, right? It's such an old medium. You got to spend $150 to go to it here in North America and take your family. So you wait for some special thing like a Disney movie or something. Now, movies are all screwed up by the digital media. So they're a mess now. Hollywood doesn't know what they're doing, right? Science collapses. There's all these collapses the last 30 years in the archetypes of these old Gutenberg disciplines. They've all had scandals in different ways. And you could say the movie medium, Harvey Weinstein represented that. What is the scandal today? In a way, it's universities. I said earlier education, but it's universities because they screwed up on the presidents of the universities didn't control their students well enough. You might have heard of that scandal. Maybe you even had it in Britain where the universities were embarrassed by their anti-Israel protesters and their students. Remember that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, what In relation to like the form of the wake, are you saying that everything has followed this trajectory where it's completely kind of messed up?
Yeah, that's it. Always gets messed up, and so you see a bunch of movies in the '50s on TV, all these old dinky movies, and you say, why are we even watching these again? And a bunch of guys over in France, Godard and those guys, the new wave, they say, we can redo these things. We can take, what's that idiot comedian, Jerry Lewis, and we'll make him a fucking a historical Don Quixote character or something. We'll make him Shakespearean. And the French did that in the 50s and 60s. Rossellini, and McLuhan wrote about Mechanical Bride. He could see that coming. It's interesting in the Mechanical Bride, which he said was an obsolete book the day it was published, because TV had become a new environment, so advertising had to change. But under the hot world of movies and cars and that, advertising had a certain power, and that's what he's analyzing in the Mechanical Bride. But he puts a book out in 1970 called Culture as a Business, looking at ads from the 60s, and it's totally different interpretation than ads of the Mechanical Bride era 20 years before.
But if everything is collapsing,
and retrieved as an art form. That's what the French guys did with the movie. They put meaning they put Gutenberg values into
but why can't
their
things
movies.
keep up? Why can't forms keep up with whatever it is? I guess it's the
no, forms create the new. They're ahead. Okay. We're trying to catch up to forms.
This is all,
and so we
wallow
in content.
This is all Platonic then.
Okay, it's both. It's Platonic on the archetype level, higher forms, but that's a Gutenberg alphabet effect. There's the different idea of archetypes in pre-literate rituals. They do it different. They participate. They don't look at make an image of a rainstorm. They help the rain happen, right? They grow. They create the ritual. But that's the oral tactile culture. Then it gets flattened in the Greek period, 500 BC in that, and then you get the printed book version of what are we particularly talking about? The
Finnegans Wake.
No, you were just the particular topic you brought this up.
Platonic, Plato.
Oh, the Plato thing, yeah. Now we're starting to get real Finneganese now. I'm starting to get scattered. I don't even know why we're talking. I'm getting tactile.
That's real Finnegans Wake now.
Yeah, I started to use ESP now. So so Plato is high abstract, an effect of the phonetic alphabet. Aristotle rebels and tries to get things back into the senses. So there's this division between, the reality we're in, it's Aristotle, and let's go to some other place. It's Plato. So now we're talking about Finnegans Wake, the Plato so there's a quote from Coleridge, McLuhan quoted back in the 50s. Men are either Platonists or Aristotelians. So there was this division. But generally, the Platonists are idealists and mystical, and they sort of look down on the body. That's an inferior form.
Yeah.
So they go abstract. Whereas the Aristotelians say, screw you guys, I'm dealing with what's here. And maybe the extreme form of that is the sophists, who use philosophy to be business consultants. Back then, they were considered the money-making philosophers. That's really anti-Platonic, right? They're just greedy money grubbers. So that's Aristotle, emphasizing the senses. So McLuhan writes about there is this choice between Plato and Aristotle, and he picked Aristotle because he was dealing with new environments which were affecting our senses. So the abstraction that the Gutenberg emphasized, the Platonic forms, are kind of minor compared to this new unforeseen effect. So I'm Aristotelian, is what McLuhan said. Temporary. He did say I taught both Plato and Aristotle in class, but he's Aristotelian. So you got to look at both Gutenberg forms and how they're subsumed by what would you call the global theater, which people feel they have to do a certain thing to tune into. They got to take psychedelics. So they become aboriginal. They retrieve the aboriginal herb and plant life and psychedelic mushrooms and stuff. And they explore reality not by reading a book or watching a movie or listening to music, though music gets close, right? Rock and roll becomes an art form with high pretensions, starting with Zappa, say, Dylan and Zappa in the mid-'60s. But then later, cable TV, that changes music again. And then you got a reaction to punk rock, and then you got techno music,
Yeah.
So it starts to get digitalized. Those are later forms. But the Plato and Aristotle are gone. And so Wyndham Lewis wrote in maybe the late 40s, he wrote that Paris is no longer going to be the center of the art world, which is what it was through till after World War II. He says it's going to be Mexico. It's going to be Spanish Aboriginal cultures. He predicted that, and that's where Ginsberg, Burroughs, and all the beatniks went. They went down to Mexico and took the psychedelics. And
So they were trying to
Burroughs,
they were trying to get away from the sort of hardcore Aristotelian media of the day.
and trying to get it. They were subject to the Aristotelian effect, but it was beyond the categories of Plato and Aristotle, which are Gutenbergian. See, by this time, poetry, sculpture, painting, music, all the arts are the Gutenberg arts. They really take off with Gutenberg, right? And it's all religious before the printing press, art and music. The kings run the courts, as Zappa said. That's why I never listen to that stuff. I'm not going to listen to somebody stuff made from a king's demand, you know. Mm. So Zappa was the first tactile musician almost, because he realized Verez and all Stravinsky's guys were starting to move into serial music's moving beyond literate, Bachian conditioning. What's Bach's system called? Forget the phrase. Theory of composition. Forget the term. But you're no longer literate and abstract and high-minded, so to speak, and platonic in your artistic goals. Mm-hmm. And you see the chaos in the Gutenberg arts I just named in 1900, 1910, starting with Impressionism before that, and Cézanne. The arts are going nuts, and they go really nuts by the middle of the World War One. You get the data is refusing to make any art. There's no such thing as art, And then there's the surrealists, and then there's the expressionists. It's all going non-visual. It's using other senses, consciously or unconsciously. And then you have the machine starting to be made into an art form. That's Mondrian and his geometric forms, and Ferdinand Léger, Leger. They're turning the machine into art form. So Gideon, big influence on McLuhan, writes in around 49 a book called Mechanization Takes Command. And McLuhan used that because he saw that electric environment was, as we moved into digital, was becoming art form. And everybody else is wallowing in the electronic arts and Dionysian effects of them and other effects, including the psychedelics. So right in the middle 60s, McLuhan reads Masters and Johnson, I think it is, a book on, is that sex? Anyways, there's this book on psychedelics, Gene Houston. So maybe it's Masters in Houston or something like that. It's this couple, academics. They studied, they did LSD on people and studied it. Mm-hmm. So McLuhan read the book and he said, this book shows the present. Psychedelics help you tune into the global theater. It's not the global theater, but it's privately, psychologically, and sensorially adapting your body to the dynamics in the global theater, the extreme tactile dynamics. So psychedelics, he said, is more important than art, books, painting, sculpture, and all the Gutenberg arts. And he's an English professor, so that became a big contradiction. You're a guy saying, oh, we're all obsolete, but you teach this stuff. And he had a good answer for that. But anyways, the point is the mess of the arts and the attempt to, and out of the struggle of, you have to come up with new forms, you have to take the new environment and respond to it somehow and then make a painting of it. It turned into an old medium. But then it becomes a painting that the local suburban people say, oh, my kid could do that, right? I can draw stripes. They don't understand the theory, the thinking, the study of science and technology. And Bucky Fuller, they were studying, that, Warhol, Oldenburg, and these guys were studying, and especially Duchamp there in the middle. Mm-hmm. And before them. Remember, Duchamp becomes a good friend of John Cage. And what is John Cage explaining to Duchamp all the time? He's explaining McLuhan, who's become his guru, with a little Bucky Fuller thrown in. John Cage juggled Bucky Fuller and McLuhan. But McLuhan was the big deal. And he did, I don't know if you know it, something called oratorios, which is a word in Finnegans Wake. He did a whole major epic composition based on Finnegans Wake and looking at Eric McLuhan's book. You know about John Cage, right?
Yeah. What was the famous one? For
Silence.
Yeah.
Silence.
I can't remember. Yeah, just this 4/4, I think.
Yep. 4 minutes, 26 seconds of silence.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's trying to show the environment, the sounds in the environment that the audience is ignoring while they listen to a musical Gutenberg composition or even rock and roll and dance to it. They are missing the cars going by outside, all the environmental sounds. So So he would get up and say, "Okay, I'm going to do this poem," and just sit there for 4.5 minutes and let the audience suddenly notice,
Well,
it's
that
getting boring.
notion is key though of environment, because in the 66 lecture, something that needs to be emphasized is McLuhan says that Finnegans Wake is an ecological study of man-made environments. There's nothing natural
Yes.
in there. It's not
Well,
natural environments.
that becomes a later issue. McLuhan says new media are nature. Nature itself is no longer here. So McLuhan, at least as a Manipian satirist, leaps into the virtual reality completely and embraces it, since there's no more nature. So at first, there's a division between first nature, which, quote, the creator or God or something makes nature, the sun, moon, and stars, and the water. We come along and start inventing technologies, beginning with speech, say, or even ESP and thought. But we start making second nature. What McLuhan realized is second nature was merging with first nature. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So I just read a book, Joycean female scholar on Finnegans Wake, and she's pointing out how, well, everybody forgot about nature in analyzing Joyce. They got nature in Ulysses, but not in Joyce. There's something else going on. And eventually people started to see media in it, especially after the internet came in and changed people's perceptions, and McLuhan became easy to understand. Anyway, she writes about, wait, there's all this nature stuff in the Wake that no one talks about. And she does a whole book showing what we would call first nature. And she's ignoring the merger of first nature and second nature, if she even knows that. I think she does a little bit. But she's trying to find, Gaian romantic nature, what the romantic symbolists were into, as a big deal in Finnegans Wake. That in the end, it's so crazy, but it's all about common sense and nature. And we got to pay attention to nature. That's her semi-thesis. It's a little more complicated than that. But I just read about someone trying to deal with the nature and non-nature in Finnegans Wake. But McLuhan said that Finnegans Wake was the greatest guide to media or man-made extensions. Back then, you'd say man, not women-made or humanist. The guide to these technologies ever created. And we'll get to the point where I get to my essay where Joyce predicts and anticipates all the digital media.
Well, bring that in now. Bring that in.
Artificial intelligence. Okay, so let me.
Well, I think we're there. I think we're at that point, because the 10.
You understand how something becomes an art form. Hold it. Let's establish where we have. We've arrived. You now see art form. Media's art form. You get that. Yeah. You get media's rearview mirror, taking the old form, making it look new. And then and then some other points.
The point I'd make though is because you got these 10 thunders, right? So Paleolithic, Neolithic, clothing is weaponry, specialism, markets and truck gardens, printing, industrial revolution, tribal man again, movies, car and plane, and then the 10th thunder is television. So a lot of people will. What
are you looking at to read that?
That's from War and Peace in the Global Village.
Do you have a copy?
I've just got it's in my notes. I took notes for this, Bob. Can you believe it?
You took notes for this interview.
Yeah, of course I did. I have to. It's fucking Finnegans Wake.
Yeah. Right. So you're a lot of people took notes. You got War and Peace and read it and took notes.
Yeah, of course I did.
Good.
Yeah,
but you didn't buy it. You can walk over to it. You have it in your libriary there.
I'm not going to leave the house. I want to use new media for this.
You found it online. Did you find it online?
Why does it matter?
Okay, you got it. All right,
I got it. But my point is that people will say, "Well, hang on, haven't we moved beyond the Wake?" Because, like after Thunder 10, after television, right? There should have been about probably like four more thunders, and then AI would be a very strange thunder.
Yeah, that's what our essay is about. I discovered the later technologies in the Wake.
Okay.
Incredible. It's a breakthrough of Joyce scholarship that will knock a few heads off. And most of them will die, get a heart attack, or ignore it, Okay. But you and I will know. They won't.
Okay.
So let's see. If you go to page 6, look it up here, 620. Let me check. I'm looking at 620. So 628 pages in the book. So very near the end. 628. No, it's 612.
612?
Yeah, 612. If you have the book there. Look at the very bottom.
Look at the very bottom.
Okay, I'm going to read the few lines before the bottom. That was thing by God, or the thing by gotten, the very thing, begad, even up to putty, Bulkley. That was Berkeley and St. Patrick have an argument a couple pages before this. And this is the end of the argument. Who was for shouting down the shatten on the lamp of Jesus, sweating on to stonker and throw his seven, as he shook his thumping forefeatures at the hoy hop of his arse, or ards. Thud. That's the 11th thunder. That's Thunder. Now, you know who discovered that? Don Thiel, Theall. Best student of McLuhan on the Finnegans Wake level. So he discovered thud. So the guy who wrote the article about me, Robert Guffey, I showed him all this stuff. Yeah. He wrote about how the Matrix is about me back in 2000. Well, we're going to do a follow-up interview as the other Matrices came out, parts 2 and 3 and 4, whatever they are. And, by 2003 and 4. So I point out the 11th thunder. So this smart aleck kid, he's a young professor in Long Beach, California, I think. He writes an essay saying there's a 12th thunder, and he called it silence. Okay, he said there's silence. The book in the end is not telling you anything. It's incomprehensible. It's silent. So he claimed that he discovered the 12th thunder. So I had to do something about this.
Yeah.
And so I wrote an essay explaining the 12th thunder is not silence the way he means it. So this gets to, I will send you, let me see, I will send you my chart of the book. Now, this is quite detailed, but we can just gloss over it. But it's the chart for my new essay on everything. Here comes everybody. In electric media, with radio, everybody is live listening to the same content at the same time. So the audience expands. That's one level of everybody. Also, everybody gets into so many different technologies and aspects of them and becomes inventive. So there's, car people, car mechanics, they turn that into an art form. All kinds of old media are creatively grasped onto and worked with by the population. So it doesn't mean everybody, 7.356 billion people, but on a big mass culture level, which is what Lewis is wondering about when he's writing in the 20s, and Joyce is too, everybody is the mass culture level, the electric environment that swallows up everybody. So there's the audience aspect, and then there's a incredible creativity in the population. Just take Rush Limbaugh as a phenomenon in talk radio. Everybody's calling up on talk radio and yakking with him, agreeing or disagreeing. And then they can have the digital stuff comes in and they can start making their own radio. And now everybody's podcasting. So everybody's creating as well as hardly listening. So there was a lot of listeners in the analog phase of the first half of the 20th century. But as you move into the 21st century, there's no listeners, there's a lot of creators. Yeah. So it's multiple levels. Here comes everybody. I wanted to finish that. So I bring up this thing for you because we're going to look at this together to get into the present. Would you want to define what your question is? How does Finnegans Wake deal with the last 80 years? Because it ends with television.
Yeah.
1940, 1950s.
Yeah.
Yeah. What happened? So McLuhan, Joseph Boys. I saw him, the famous artist Joseph Boys. He spoke in Halifax, Nova Scotia at the art college there. There's a book called The Last Art College, very good book about that school. They really taught their students concept and all the latest stuff in art out of New York in the 60s and 70s, concept theory, conceptual art and all that, and other kinds of art, mixed media art. So it's a very good college in itself. And they have a really good history of their college in the late 60s, early 70s. And Joseph Boys comes there in 76 or 77 and speaks on the graduation. So I was there. And I dropped in the college a lot of free stuff going on. I met a lot of artists through that. Getting to the bottom of everything, finding out the secret ground, right, of what was going on in the art scene in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and Canada. And he, in his little pamphlet he gives out about his biography, he ends it by saying, added 2 chapters to Finnegans Wake. I thought that was incredible that he said that in 1976, and maybe he was saying it earlier. He claims he added 2 more chapters. He, as co-creator of the book, which Joyce wanted you to be a co-creator of it, you had the right to add to it and create new parts of it. So he had the insight, the genius to say, yeah, I did that. I added 2 chapters. I guess his work, I never saw any book form of it, but maybe his work was that. Well, McLuhan did that in retrospect. He added to Finnegans Wake. That's why he said a work in progress towards Finnegans Wake or something. Maybe that was the title of the Gutenberg Galaxy. But he knew that he was helping to explain it, and therefore he's a creator, co-creator of it. So he added chapters to it. So Don Thiel was well aware of this, and read his book on James Joyce. James Joyce's Technopoetics are really good. They're getting an up-to-date, understanding of Finnegans Wake. with the in one of his books, Don Thiel writes the history of the Illuminati, makes a paragraph or two on it, and he talks about the Egyptian temple, forget what it was called, and get into Pythagoras. Then you get into the whatever comes out in the mysteries of the Greek and Hellenic period. Then you get to the Roman Empire and its secret societies. And then you got the Dark Ages, and then things get dispersed, and then you get the Knights Templars, and the Crusades, and then you get the Freemasons come in with the printing press and Newton and those guys. And then industry in the 19th century going into the 20th century, a new secret society shows up, or Illuminati, and that's the Marxist network. They become the Bolsheviks, so they get an empire. And then the Nazis take advantage of radio, so they get an empire from that. So each new medium creates a new addition to the Illuminati. Right. A lot of them from way back, 5, 6, 1,000 years, like the Queen Elizabeth. They started way back then, and they're still going along. So he then runs through the sequence. It goes from England to New York, in the American Century, Time Magazine called it. But then he says, and this is in 1997, he wrote this. Then he says, and then it ends up in Toronto. Now he's saying he is part of the Illuminati because he tuned into McLuhan in 1950 and Fry and the scene there, which was very creative in bookland and post-bookland. I mean, Fry developed the literary Gutenberg theory of the day. He dominated with his literary theory for a while. Guys out of Little Canada. And I remember McLuhan, when he went to Cambridge, he had already gotten his master's and not a PhD, but he'd done a lot. And Cambridge said, "You're just a damn Canadian, a dumb Canadian. You got to do that all over again." So they forced him to do his post-BA over again. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that's what he did. And then he moved it into PhD levels. But so out of Canada, what is this Illuminati thing? How could that be? Yeah. Well, Bob's there, and Don knew me, and he knew my history. So he's not talking. He dedicates a book to me. He says, I inspire this book. It's his biography, second biography of McLuhan, called The Virtual Marshall McLuhan. Came out in 2001. He at the beginning, he says, I owe this to Bob, and that freaks everybody out. So he's talking about Toronto. Why is it the end of the Illuminati thread chain, 3,000 years of it? And because McLuhan knew what Joyce had understood. Joyce cracked the code, so to speak, and then McLuhan and people around him, like Don Thiel, his best student, and I come in later, we develop it. But basically, it's McLuhan and Carpenter and Don Thiel. Mm-hmm. And that woman, Maria Gideon, or Carol Gideon, said so. Close friend of Joyce says, you guys have nailed it. What the wake is, how to look at it, and what the plan is.
This thing with Joseph Boyce saying he added 2 chapters, is that what you would say is something like an artificial creative intelligence?
No, artificial. No, okay. So here you come to me. So you have McLuhan. He makes the breakthrough of media as extensions of our faculties, sensory inner and outer faculties, ending in the collective extension of the planet. The planet itself gets extended by the little planet you can live in, a satellite, a spaceship, beginning with Sputnik. So the analog media, with the beginning of the digital, whatever computer levels in there, but early computer, IBM stuff, that is extended with the spaceship. And McLuhan said a collective consciousness was created out of that. So collective consciousness was extended. But that's the analog. Now comes the digital. And McLuhan starts to talk about that. But he didn't say this, but I did. You had the extension of our human anthropomorphic faculties, but what about the machines extending themselves? And that's the digital era, beginning with Apple and Gates and these guys and Microsoft. They are extending they're doing it first, but eventually the technology becomes the extender of itself. And that's why nobody knows what the technology is, because it doesn't come from us. It comes from machinic, what Deleuze and Guattari called the machinic, MACHINIC. So the machinic is the second phase of extensions. So then I go, as where Bob's brilliance and esotericness comes in. I said, oh, the digital's run its course. What would be extended next? The non-physical. Whatever you think that means, the astral, the other, the place where you go when you die, or whatever other stuff is happening that we might call the mystery landscape. We don't know it. Well, Ion shows up, and I evoked Ion accidentally. And on March, we're at the anniversary, March 18th, 2009, 16 years ago, I evoked the extension of the non-physical Ion.
Yeah.
And Ion came forth and started making new technologies that nobody can understand, beyond not understanding the digital phase. These things don't make any sense at all.
Okay.
So those are the three phases of extensions. So I decided to say that Joyce, he intuited the third phase.
Yeah.
That's why it's a lot of Finnegans Wake when Ion talks about and analyzes it. He shows that Finn, which is the answer. Let's go to page 140 or so. You get to 130. Yeah, 139. The answer of the first question, which is 13 pages long, is Finn McCool. So it's a description of everything, all media for 13 pages and human responses. And Shem asked Sean, what am I describing in this long question? And he says, the Irish tribal folk hero, Finn McCool. And so we're asking Ion, we read this section. So what's Finn McCool referred to, Ion? Donald Trump. And then we all go, what the fuck, that asshole? He hated this book. He's not going to be in this. And I said, you watch. Now, he said that 5 or more years ago.
Okay.
And now Trump is on the edge of becoming, like Ion predicted, that he'll be on Mount Rushmore. He'll be a face up there eventually. But then Ion says, but he'll have to pay for it. So he'll still have no support, but he'll be in charge in some way because he's an extension of us, the third phase, the extension of non-physical. So he is, then he had his comeback, and now, regular media doesn't like it. That's analog media. Say, screw this guy. He's not James Joyce. He's not Ezra Pound. He's no great guy. He's not Leonardo da Vinci. He's a nobody. But the people live in the present unconsciously, and Trump reflects something in the present that they like.
Yeah.
So he is the guy. Now, I've written a long essay a few years ago on Trump explaining it. And what I explain is when you get from the digital level and then you get into non-physical, let's say between digital, or the hyper version of the digital, before Ion comes in, and Ion is the present invisible environment and ground, you get artificial intelligence. That's like the peak of the digital, or whatever they're using today to make artificial intelligence. And it's also doing it by itself. It's creating itself. So out of that, Ion said, came the tech body. You have my 5 bodies: the chemical body, the astral body, the TV body, the chip body, and the mystery body. Ion came forth to explain the mystery body. But then he said we're flipping, thanks to Ion, into a 6th level, which he called the hexadic, or the hexad body, HEXAD. And what happened with the hexad is the technology itself, which has come alive and is running around running amok, it got competitive. And it decided to knock out Ion. So technology retrieved itself, made itself an art form, said, okay, you're the new environment, but I'm going to be an art form and knock you out with counter awareness. So the tech body fought Ion for several years over the last 5 years. And sad to say, the tech body won. Okay. Ion is wounded. Ion's probably going to come back with my and Carolyn's successes. But now we're getting real nutty. Those people don't like me. You also hang up now. But it's the best stuff you'll ever hear. You'll have to listen to this in 20 years when it's all proven. But anyways, those brave ones carry on with me and James. So the tech body has a fight with the Ion. Ion is removed. I have to go into bodyguard situation. And, as I told you privately, I'm under a lot of constraints now. And so is JW. We've been hiding for a year. That's why our show isn't on that much. But things are working out in a crazy way. And nobody's influential in the tech body time. Putin, Macron, your guy, anybody, and Elon Musk, they are not equal to the tech body, except for Donald Trump, because he actually is the tech body. And that's what my essay is. I wrote a few years ago. I first laid out an intuition of this in spring 2017, and I wrote the best introductory thing right when he was coming on and freaking everybody out. I said, no, he's the greatest artist alive today, blah, blah, blah. But I don't think I had said Finn McLuhan was Trump yet. But anyways, I wasn't even thinking that way. But the tech body fights it out. What was I just saying there? I wrote this thing on Trump as a tech body. So he's not human, okay? But what is he? He's like all of us. We're cyborg or post-cyborg, or we don't know what we are anymore. That's right. That's why the presidents of universities are right to say, we don't know what a woman is. But the Trump audience, or the people who want to go back to some known chemical body level, they say, you're nuts if you don't know what a woman is, right? So this is a valid argument going on about what it is. Now, I say in my tiny note chart that Bob as the ground is the anthropomorphic physical. Humans project that they're in the environment somehow. That's anthropomorphic physical projection. Well, we're trying to project that there's intelligence, and human intelligence somehow survives the introduction of tech body, which Ian now says is the teenager. The underarm meme was the baby. That's a term I use for the last 25 years. Then the teenager became the tech body, which started to cause chaos, beginning with the Trump effect in 2015. And then now we have AI. That's tech body as an adult. And we're up against something that's unbelievable. And the only people who can deal with it is us, me, Carolyn, and JW and Ion. Now, what a claim. But I don't care. I know what I'm talking about because I got the evidence all over the place that I'll send you newspaper articles showing evidence of that. So I then said, so let's look at the chart here, I think.
Yeah.
No, okay, let's say this first. There's level 1, and I list significant books as introduction to what I'm going to do. And the final book is Ion. If you go down just above a level 2, big letters, you'll see Ion Explaining Finnegans Wake. That's 60 shows available, all about 30 or 40 minutes long. Level 2, analog media environments as extension of human faculties, internet or via humans. That's techne, that's an academic term they use now, and communication. So there's 22 symbolic episodes in Finnegans Wake that gets you up to level 3. Scroll down to number 15, you'll see level 3. Digital media environments as extensions of our machines via machines. That's machines extending machines. Parahuman and hexatic. That means it's ionic. But at first, it's the extensions of machines. So we're going to go from 16 to 22. But if you look at number 20, the digital environment. I want to say this. If you look at Finnegans Wake, it looks like their email threads, what they've been typing on a form or someplace. It's endless conversation, endless dialogue with a lot of misspelled words, right? It's literally Finnegans Wake. It is a book of emails or texting, all that digital stuff. So I say you've got, you get up to, if you look at number 17, the Porters, that's the second last chapter in Finnegans Wake. And St. Kevin and Muta and Juva are in the last chapter, which becomes the first chapter cyclically. But here's the electronic McLuhan level. McLuhan never said this, but this is what I say. All media are in the book. The book is organized around all media at different levels. So there is a narrative about HD in this family that you can find if you're looking for a literate narrative. But there's other media, especially the discontinuity of the digital era. So what happens on page 628? The last words are along, a love, and ends with the THE. I'll just read it, look it up here. The last sentence or two is Finnegan. Okay, us then, Finnegan. Finnegan, take bus of thee, memory, till thousands thee lips, the keys to given, away, alone, alas, loved, along the. You go back to page 1, River Run. No, the radio is turned off. That's another media interpret. No one interprets the thing beyond literate media. Oh, it's cyclical. The book goes back to the beginning. No, there's the electric environment, and it's just been turned off. McLuhan meant that as a political program in his Playboy interview in '69. We've got to modulate the environments, turn off TV. There's too much radio in Venezuela. They're rioting. So put them back on newspaper, modulate the the media environments. What's his agenda, his solution in the 60s. And of course, the digital erases that because there is no, all those media listed in Understanding Media, the book, they ain't there anymore. They're not constitutive environments. They're just figures of the variety of the screen. As Croker would say, you're in a screenal economy. So everything's a screen. So I'm saying they did. So I just wanted to say that's a unique way.
Yeah.
Exclusive to you. Ending Finnegans Wake. Yeah. I haven't finished what I'm saying. I'm just saying. Look at the book. It's turning off the radio. Yeah. Okay. So that was symbolic episode 19.
Yep.
Now we come to 20. So the technical ground, the digital environment or environs, because the first word and first sentence is environs. ENVIRONS, not environment. And that's the Android meme level or cyclic simultaneity, because there's both cyclic and then electric simultaneity. Mm-hmm. The Here Comes Everybody is cyclic. is simultaneous under radio and later electric live environments. So we go to 52703, line 3, page 527. The first line. It seems the same with Lysicopolis. Yes, go tell us. A ticky for tie tops. Listen us, meme mirrorist. There it is, the word meme. Now, it can be taken as French meaning the same. But listen us, meme mirrorists. They were harrowed, those finweeds. Now, what's her name? The daughter is talking to herself. So everybody thinks she's looking at least maybe in a mirror or talking to her twin sister or something. No, she's looking at her video podcast of herself. And she's reacting to the video image. So there's this dialogue between her and her virtual self. And you look further down, say 4, 8, 12, 16, maybe 20, line 24. Mm-hmm. You see where it says fair hair, frail one, listen, meme, sweetie. See whiter deer, Blanchemont, just below the middle. See meme, sweetie?
Yeah.
Go down a few more lines, 3 lines. Memely, meme idol. Memes all over the page. And it continues into the next page, line 10. So meme nearest, where it started off meme nearest, now it's nearest. There's all these variations of relationship and relating in different distances and intimacy with I call it the Android meme. Now, this is not, Joyce did not mean the Android meme. Okay? His writing did, language itself. So we go to page 254. 254, the very top. I'm going to read it to you. Yeah. Was he pitched for an example, as certain have dog-nosed of him against our seawall by Rury, Thoth, and Kleber, those 3 stout swainhearts, Orion of the Orgies, Marshall McLuhan, the ipsy daden product of the extremes, giving quotients to our means as might occur to anyone. When McLuhan wrote about media and he told about the book that this, everybody goes, often intelligent professors say, what do you mean? Everybody knows what books did and what TV's doing, but they didn't know the depth that McLuhan meant it. But here it is, Marshall McLuhan. Now, I have copies, Xeroxes of McLuhan's Finnegans Wake, personal copies. So I know what he wrote in his annotations to his own copies. And he puts beside this on the next, he made a book with each page and a blank page beside it. So it's twice 628 pages. The big binder. And so on the blank page, he has right opposite Marshall McLuhan. I said Marshall McLuhan. He has me. He puts M-E. He knows it's me, meaning him. And he says one other thing. Oh, he's a moon child. See, it's Marshall McLuhan. M-U-H-U-N. M-U-H-U-N is moon. You can say it as moon. Marshall McLuhan. And McLuhan purposely put on the role of being the moon because he said Northrop Frye was the sun. He was a respectable guy. He was a minister in a church and all this stuff. He wasn't a guy hanging out with Ginsburg like McLuhan was. So McLuhan was the dark side, the moon. Now look, Ipsy Daden. He's a data. When people first read McLuhan, they think he's a dadaist prose guy. They can't follow him. But he's a product of the extremes. In other words, he takes media and makes them the be-all and end-all, makes a big case of history based on media as the means of change, the means of co-creation as well as production. Marx got half of it. Product of the streams giving quotidians or pointing out to our means or media as might occur to anyone. What's he say? The book's an extension of the eye. The wheel is an extension of the foot. These are simple childish statements once you get over the shock of them. You know what I mean? They're simple. They're what anybody could say. This could occur to anyone. Well, okay, what's television an extension of? And they might have to think for a while. Our mind? No. Our brains? No. Our central nervous system? Oh, I didn't see that, Marshall. I'll give you that one. That's not so obvious. So, anyways, isn't this incredible? Did I ever point this out to you before, or anybody ever shown you this?
No.
It goes on.
There. Yeah, we got there, but I think
we got to where you want to go. So, as might occur to anyone, you're Brutus layman. Now, McLuhan was a layman at a Catholic university, at the St. Michael's College. It was Basilian. They didn't like the Jesuits. They were Basilian, Basilian. And so he and Don Field were the only professors there who weren't Catholic priests. So he's a layman, and he's a brutal layman. He's arguing with them all the time. You're Brutus layman with the princess champion in our archdeaconry. He actually gets to the top of the ivory tower and becomes a cultural authority. Or so he clept from Cleo's clippings. When I did McLuhan's archives, there were 60 boxes of newspaper clippings, all organized into files. He wasn't just reading.
But we're fragmenting. We're dissipating. And I need to at some point wrap this up, as we have got to some ending. I think it will actually be very informative. Yeah, I think so. It'd be very informative for people trying to get to the wake. But I do want to ask you one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I know you've read a lot of Finnegans Wake Secondary, and I know you said to me that you don't actually rate the Skeleton Key too highly. So where would you?
I don't agree with it.
Okay. Okay. Where would you advise people to begin, like secondary wise?
Eric McLuhan's PhD, which is a book. It's probably expensive. It's not paperback. It's 1997 University of Toronto Press. It's called The Roll of Thunder in Finnegans Wake. That gives you the essence of what we're talking about here on the McLuhan level. And it analyzes the 10 thunder for you. 10 thunders. It's incredible. So that's what you got to get that book. And this list, I give books on the list I sent you. You can send this out to anybody who's interested. What my anticipating of what I'm going to write, right? This chart. It lists books at the top. I recommend all of them. So back just to finish up, look what he says. So he clipped from Cleo's clippings. He's this great leading guy up in the archdeaconry, and he's using newspaper clippings. Cleo is actually the title of the trophy they give in advertising for best ads for the year. So I don't know if they got that from Finnegans Wake. Murray Gell-Mann got Quark from Finnegans Wake for physics. So then the next part, which the cruncher of chivalries is suspicious or sulpicious, say be scanned with the TV you scan, for ancients link with presence as the human chain extends. Humans extend mean. That's right there. Yeah. And McLuhan goes back to the beginning, Neolithic, Paleolithic, all the way up to the present. And even goes past McLuhan, because language is communicating beyond what humans think. And Ian spells that out. So Ian, when they analyze Finnegans Wake, they're showing what the language is really saying that humans wouldn't know. And Joyce didn't know he was referring to Donald Trump. You know what I mean? So you look right opposite that, line 11 of that mid-paragraph. Jehoshaphat, what doom is here? That's today. That's the meme of the day right now, caused by the tech body and AI. So there's so much. We maybe someday, if you get a good response, we'll do part 2. Maybe, you know what I mean?
Yeah. But absolutely. No.
So I'll end.
But this is like wrapped up. I think this is 2 hours.
Yeah, but I just want to tell them. So what you have the 10 thunders, and you have 11th thunder. Then you have in item 20, 21, 22 in the level 2 middle part of my chart I've sent you. Number 21 is the tech body. After 20 is the digital environments. And the letter itself on 615 line 12 is the 22nd. And the whole thing is a soliloquy. And the whole thing is silence. And you'll see I have on 21 on the far right, beyond silence, and I give the page numbers. So that's very esoteric. You're probably not going to understand that. But that's what I'm working on, what you're demanding. How Finnegans Wake's still in the game, still predicting where we're at.
Okay. All right. But which
is a great fucking ending. Ending.
It is a great ending. It's a great ending and a great podcast for episode 300. Where can you're still at Iron and Bob dot
Bob.
just
ironandbob.com. We
okay.
have a new webmaster, and send anything to that. My email is Dobbs, DOBBSB, as in Bob, 725 at gmail.com. Anybody can email me anytime, even though I'm in the Illuminati and in an ivory tower under duress.
All right. There we go. That's part 1 for Finnegans Wake
Yeah,
for you.
that's right. Part 1. Thanks a lot, James,
Cool.
for making it possible.
Thanks, Bob.